All right, guys, welcome to our last uh, lecture for human growth and development for the semester. So, the topic for this lecture will be late adulthood and very old age. We're going to lump the very, late adulthood and very old age chapters into one PowerPoint. So the objectives for this session are to talk about the changes that occur in individuals as they age into later adulthood and very old age, the cognitive changes, social changes, physical changes, things of that nature. And also how individuals of this age group view the concept of death and dying as opposed to other age groups, such as teenagers or young adults. We'll get into that in just a bit. So the developmental tasks for late adulthood include things such as adjusting to changes in your health, figuring out what retirement is going to look like, figuring out what sort of arrangements need to be made to ensure that you have a safe and comfortable retirement. Coping with the loss or the declining health of a spouse or a loved one, possibly even your own children, and adjusting to new social roles as one comes out of the workforce, adjusts to being a grandparent rather than a parent, and possibly has to change their living environment in order to compensate for limitations of physical. So kind of summarizing it, kind of bringing it all together, the developmental tasks are categorized as accepting one's life, promoting intellectual vigor, so ensuring that one's cognitive abilities don't stagnate and their cognitive abilities don't decline as a result of that, staying mentally stimulated and whatnot. Changing and redirecting one's energy to new roles and activities, such as, leisure activities, enjoying what one has accumulated throughout life, and developing a new point of view about oneself and one's relationship with death and the concept of the beyond. In very old age, which your book characterizes as age 75 to death, the tasks are categorized as dealing with physical changes, developing a psychohistorical perspective. Now, what is a psychohistorical perspective? Essentially, that's seeing yourself in the context of history. It's seeing yourself as being a member of generations and a facilitator of tradition, passing on traditions. And then traveling the uncharted territory. For each person, very old age is a very unique period. Nobody experiences this time as anybody else does. And you could say that for all the other age groups, but as one's physical health declines and as one's perhaps mental health declines, the way in which we cope with that, the way in which we bring others around us to help us through this, and the way we manage ourselves as we near the end of our life cycle is very different and is unique. So let's talk about the Ericksonian stage, integrity versus despair. And this is in Erickson's late adulthood stage. Erickson has this to say about ego integrity. Trust, or the first of our ego values, is here defined as the assured reliance on another's integrity, the last of our values. So he bridges the first and the last of our values. It seems possible to further paraphrase the relation of adult integrity and infantile trust by saying that healthy children will not fear life if their elders have integrity enough not to fear death. So what he's trying to get at here is there is continuity across the lifespan. Each of our stages of life, each of the lessons we learn, the adaptive ego qualities, the lessons we've learned, and the values we've gained are connected. And the concept of ego integrity for Erikson is it can be summed up in terms of ego integration. We take the various aspects of our life. We take the core pathologies and the ritualisms, the significant, spheres of significant relations, and we just bring it all together. And essentially we are the pinnacle of who we are going to be when we are in this stage. Erikson has this to say in his book, Identity, Youth, and Crisis, about integrity. It is a sense of comradeship with men and women of distant times and of different pursuits, who have created orders and objects and sayings conveying human dignity and love. Although aware of the relativity of all the various lifestyles which have given meaning to human striving, the possessor of integrity is ready to defend the dignity of his own life against all physical and economic threats. For he knows that an individual life is the accidental coincidence of but one life cycle with but one segment of history, and that for him all human integrity stands and falls with the one style of integrity of which he partakes. And so what he's saying there is it's assuming that psychohistorical perspective. It's understanding that we are among the generations and what they have created, and what we have created contributes to that, what has come before and what will come after. And so we kind of see ourselves as sort of in a transcendent sort of way. He has this to say about despair, though. Despair expresses the feeling that time is short, too short, for the attempt to start another life and to try out alternate roads to integrity. Such a despair is often hidden behind a shadow of disgust, a misanthropy, or a chronic contemptuous displeasure with particular institutions and particular people, a disgust and a displeasure which, where not allied with the vision of a superior life, only signify the individual's contempt of himself. So the concept of despair is more of a bitterness, an anger, a hostility towards oneself. It's saying, I haven't contributed, I haven't done anything with my life, I haven't made any difference. My life was meaningless, essentially. And it's a hatred of that, a bitterness toward one's life that is oftentimes projected onto other people in a sort of bitter or agitated or irritable sort of demeanor. So the central process for Erikson's integrity versus despair stage is introspection. How do we come to a sense of ego integrity? How do we come to a sense of despair? We take a look at ourselves. We see ourselves in relation to humanity as a whole, which is the significant radius of significant relation. Humanity as a whole. Humanity is a historical construct. Humanity as a series of generations. And we see ourselves in relation to that, and we say, all right, where am I at? What have I done? Who am I? What are my accomplishments? What are my failures? Where are the ways that I could have done better, or where are the ways that I did the best I had? And we say to ourselves, am I a good person or am I a bad person? I'm reminded of the scene from the movie Saving Private Ryan, where at the very end, he's standing at the grave of the captain, and he says to his wife, "Am I a good man?" He was trying to determine whether or not he had earned his life that was given to him by the team that rescued him. And so that kind of sums up this stage. Am I a good man? Have I done enough? Have I been good enough? The adaptive ego quality for this stage is wisdom. And Erickson has this to say about wisdom. Strength here takes the form of that detached yet active concern with life bounded by death, which we can call wisdom in its many connotations, from ripened wits to accumulated knowledge, mature judgment, and inclusive understanding. So your book also kind of touches on this concept of wisdom, but it asks the question, what is wisdom? It's very difficult to pin down a singular definition of wisdom, a singular construct as to, okay, how do we operationally define wisdom? I have no answer to that. And Erickson had no answer to that. He threw out a variety of ideas, from accumulated wisdom to wit to a variety of different ideas. And so wisdom is up in the air for a lot of us, and it's possibly very individually defined. Core pathology for this stage, though, is disdain. It is that bitterness. It is that hatred or irritability of oneself that is projected upon the world. The principle of social order is, again, wisdom. It's the adaptive ego quality and the principle of social order that contributes to the benefit of further generations. We'll see later on in the presentation how older individuals are kind of like sages. They're the embodiment of the values and traditions that have come before, and they are the ones that convey that to others. The ritualization and ritualism for this stage is kind of related to that. It's developing a philosophy of life, developing an understanding of what it all means and why we're here and where we're going afterwards, and how we're going to approach the remainder of our life. And are we going to be flexible with that, or are we going to take a dogmatic hardline approach? Are we going to suggest to others, you need to, assume my philosophy of life, otherwise, you're going to ruin the world for the future, something of that nature. The theological lesson that Gleason puts forth here is eschatology. And if anybody's taken sort of a introduction to theology course or anything of that nature, you'll know that eschatology is a study or a understanding of the end, the understanding of finitude. And so Gleason suggests that, as we grow older, we get a sense of ourselves as infinite beings, that there is going to be, we develop a philosophy for ourselves as to, is there an afterlife? Is there, going to be something to look forward to after I finish here? It's a philosophy of the end. Now, your book describes a stage that Erickson did not develop, and that is the immortality versus extinction crisis. And for Erickson, integrity versus despair was the final stage that he described. But Since then, other theorists have come out and said, well, maybe we should split up old age or late adulthood and old age because people are living longer, and the construct of old age has changed a lot since when Erickson created his theory. And because of this, you have a lot of sort of uncertainty about other areas. Gleason didn't ever have this, to draw on for his theological lesson. Erickson never was able to touch on ritualism, or the principle of social order, or even the radius of significant relations for this stage. So really all we have are the concepts of the central process, adaptive ego quality, and the core pathology. And of course, the central process for this stage would be social support. As we get older, we become more dependent upon other people to help us to ensure our safety and health. Possibly if we become cognitively or physically incapacitated, we would be relying upon people in a very consistent and constant sort of relationship with people. So I would say, possibly, just positing things, perhaps the radius of significant relations would be caregivers or close, intimate family relations. These are the people that would care for us and show us support in this time. So the adaptive ego quality for this stage would be confidence. And this kind of is an extension of the integrity versus despair crisis, in that we have developed a sense of confidence in ourselves and our ability to well, maybe not in our ability, but in our sense of who we are. I am who I am, and that's okay. Whereas, and it's also a confidence in where we will go. What is going to happen afterwards, and the confidence contributes to a peace about what's going to happen as we get older and into our death. And then the core pathology for this is diffidence, or an uncertainty, or uncaringness, or lack of confidence as to what is coming. It's a fearful sort of way of being. It's a dread or a hatred of the concept of death and the concept of I'm no longer going to be here. I'm no longer in control, perhaps, of my life. Other people are caring for me, and I hate that. Something like that. Again, principle of social order and the ritualism. I'm really not sure. I would love to hear some thoughts on that as to what you guys think would be the concepts that could be developed here, and maybe somebody would like to write a paper on that eventually. But perhaps the theological lesson would be eternity. Maybe a concept of, okay, even if they're not a religious or spiritual individual, perhaps they're okay with the concept of just not being anymore. Maybe they're okay with the concept of ending. Perhaps, though, if they are religious, there is a concept of continuance, a concept of eternity. Now, how do we think of, forever? I mean, for instance, how do we think of God as being eternally before us and eternally after us? That's huge. I can't even fathom that. So perhaps there is perhaps we get a glimpse of that as we age and as we move forward into our eternity. I don't know. Just a thought. So Erickson's view of aging. I think we've already kind of touched on this, but just as a review, integrity is an acceptance, whereas despair is a bitterness towards one's life and one's past. Integrity involves accepting and being and self-affirming. I am good enough. I have done good enough, and I am worthwhile. And it takes that introspective life review to come to this wisdom about oneself. So, as we age, there are cognitive and physical changes that occur. And we'll just touch on these briefly. Your book goes into much more detail about this. But there is a gradual increase in verbal meaning, in your ability to perform verbally as you age into about 45 to 60. Our verbal skills increase, whereas our spatial and fluid reasoning may actually decrease slightly. There is stability in our word fluency and number ability until about the age of 45, and then it slowly decreases. Word fluency is, well, for instance, I'm going to say a letter, and I would like for you to just tell me all of the words that you can think of that start with that letter. B. Go. And you would just rattle off as many words as you could think of. That's how we measure in psychometrics word fluency. So that's what that means. So there is a difference, though, in how one researches this. If one takes a longitudinal approach, the declines that we see are not nearly as significant as if you take a cross-sectional approach. So, for instance, if you have are doing research using different age groups, all right, versus following one particular age group throughout their entire life, if you compare them to different age groups, there is a significant decline there. Why would that be? Well, perhaps educational resources, socioeconomic resources, political changes at the time, the requirement of education completion, may be completely different between these older individuals and the younger individuals. Could be any number of things. But as we follow one particular group, the changes are not quite as severe as if we follow, or if we just look at group to group to group to group. So, in terms of cognitive changes, there are there have been found to be fairly steady changes across the lifespan. So, for instance, this purple line here represents your processing speed. And, I mean, when you're 25, you can, rattle off things, you can play video games and react, and you can figure things out quickly. But it's the one that declines the most as we age. We get slower, our cognitive processing speed sort of decreases, and we kind of slow down, essentially, in our thought process. The others are kind of more stable. I believe that's your verbal memory. No, can't quite tell from the colors here. Perhaps that's your number ability. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think that's your number ability. It kind of declines as well. But these others increase more as you move towards middle age. And then they kind of stabilize. So your verbal memory, your vocabulary, your reasoning ability, your spatial abilities, they kind of stabilize between the ages of 46 and 67 here. This graph doesn't show what happens in later, older age, but you could be pretty well guaranteed that some, if not most of these will kind of begin to fall off a little bit. So, again, slower reaction times occur, slower visual searching Poor free recall memory abilities decline slightly. Fluid intelligence, what is that? That's essentially your ability to reason flexibly. It's your ability to take in novel information, process it, and use it. Okay? Whereas crystallized intelligence is stuff that you have learned and stuff that you know. So vocabulary is the best example of what crystallized intelligence would be. Your vocabulary over time is um, the most reliable measure of your intellectual abilities across your lifespan. Okay. And then, of course, training and practice can slow declines. I work in a neuropsychological clinic right now, getting some experience in that. And one of the things that we oftentimes recommend is that people invest in things like CogMed or Lumosity.com to just play some games or get some, go to the mental gym and work out your neurons a little bit. So there are two views on aging. There are two ways that people have looked and conceptualized the process of aging. One is a very hostile, fearful sort of way of going about into aging. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of the day. Rage against the dying of the light. That's an angry, sort of a hostile or fearful way of approaching one's death. Whereas this way is sort of a peaceful way and a serene way of approaching the end of life. Grow old along with me. The best is yet to be. The last of life for which the first was made. Our times are in his hand. It's a very faithful way of looking at the end of life. And as such, it was written by a rabbi. So obviously there's a lot of faith behind this. Socially speaking, there are many changes that occur as we get older. Living arrangements change. We may get a caregiver, or somebody might have to come in and ensure we're taking our medications, or we're eating properly, or something of that nature. And there are a variety of different living arrangements that exist along a continuum of independence. So is one living alone, or is one, in a nursing home, having, all of their needs cared for by other people. But in addition, there's also homelessness. There's a potential for there to be a lot of older individuals who can't work anymore, can't make their house payments, didn't plan for the future, or maybe got swindled out of their money, and they're unable to afford a lifestyle of that they can afford, and so perhaps there's a higher rate of homelessness among elderly individuals. And so sorry, somebody just came in. One of the big things that has come out of a lot of these increases in the older age populations, oftentimes because of the baby boomers are getting older and things of that nature, is they want to maintain a sense of control. They want to maintain a sense of competency, autonomy, and control over their life. And so a lot of nursing homes try to maintain that for people as much as they can, as much as the person is able to provide for themselves and perform. They try to give them as much autonomy as possible. A lot of times, let me rephrase that. We're seeing a lot more abuse and neglect of older individuals in recent years, though. Why is that? Is that because there's just suddenly become a rash of elder abuse? Maybe. But a lot more, I feel, a lot of it is due to increased awareness of adult protective services. or people are being more aware of the concept of elder abuse, such that they are looking out for neglect, malnourishment of an older individual, uh, not meeting their hygiene needs or their physical health or safety needs, and so they're more apt now to call. I remember when I first started learning about ethical care of individuals, learning, not hearing anything about adult protective services. It was all about child protective services. But now the concept of adult protective services is on the rise, and it's becoming a much more accepted, a much more needed thing. So, interpersonally, we see a variety of different changes that may occur as we age. There are social relationships that change. So, sibling relationships change. And you have 5 different types here that your book does go over in some a little bit more depth and detail. Marriages that are long term tend to be more happy, have less conflict, but as one deals with one's spouse as they decline in health or as they move towards death, it can be a very stressful time. And that leads into being a widow or a widower. Men tend to have difficulty with social relationships and household tasks when their wives die. Women may have financial problems, especially if the husband has been the one to maintain the finances all their life. So one thing you oftentimes see is that the widowed or the widower often remarry in order to kind of establish that balance in their life again. And also the advent of grandchildren and, in fact, great-grandchildren can be a source of happiness, contentment, fun, enjoyment, and satisfaction with one's life. In terms of grandparenting, you see a variety of different styles, and your book goes into this with some depth and detail, but I'll just touch on these right now. You have different styles. You have the formal grandparent. These are the ones that are sort of the matriarch and patriarch of the family. They're the ones that are the, regal sort of, I'm going to keep my distance and let you do your thing, but I'm here if you need me. That differs from the distant one who just doesn't want to have anything to do with you at all. The formal one is very, I will be here if you need me, whereas the distant one is go away. You have your life, I have my life, sort of thing. Then you have the fun seeking, the one that is sort of the fun grandparent who plays with the kids and takes them on day trips and things like that and spoils them rotten. Then you have the surrogate parent, and this is one that's coming into a lot more prominence as of late because you see grandparents having to assume caretaker roles as parents perhaps abandon their child or get arrested or just feel like they're incapable of managing a child. And then you have them as the sage, the reservoir of family wisdom, the authority figure, as it were, the one that holds the traditions of the family and really can bring stabilization to the family. And that brings us to the different roles of grandparenting. The stabilizer being the first. These are the grandparents that are the rock of the family. A lot of times, if a grandparent dies or becomes incapacitated, some families will will go into crisis. Children will infight among themselves. You'll see secrets come out. You'll hear, all sorts of negative things that happen if that grandparent dies. Apparently, this is a very popular room. People keep trying to come in. Family. They also have the family watchdog, the guardian of the family, the one that protects them from there being anything bad happening to the family. Then there's the arbiter, the negotiator. Are they going to, in which they take a stance between two quarreling siblings and say, all right, you're grown up. Let's deal with this, and do this right. Or perhaps they're the ones that will take a stand with a son or a daughter who's in a legal situation or things like that. And then the family historian. That's the tradition keeper, the family storyteller. In retirement is defined differently by different people. Are you going to retire and then continue working? Are you going to retire and maybe go on vacation constantly? Are you going to retire and sit in a chair next to the beach? Who knows? Are you going to spend more time with the kids? It's different for each person. There are gender and racial differences, though. How one retires is culturally let me rephrase that. How one goes through retirement is very culturally determined. So somebody in, for instance, a Native American culture their retirement would look different from a Euro-American culture or a Middle Eastern culture. The biggest concern in this time is finances and health. Obviously, health is going to decline as one gets older, but hopefully, as time has passed it throughout life, you've taken steps to prepare for this eventuality and ensure that your children are well cared for financially and your spouse is cared for financially and things of that nature. Social relationships are very important during this time. It's bringing others around you rather than isolating yourself and going through old age alone. The more people that you have around you in this time, the better off mentally and physically you actually will be. There are a variety of personality changes that occur during this time as well. There's obviously the valuing of wisdom, whereas previously there was a valuing of physical power and physical prowess. All of a sudden, maybe not all of a sudden, but as time passes, your emphasis switches from physical health to what you've gained mentally. Socializing versus sexualizing in relationships. In younger age, we focus more on the sexual aspect of relationships, whereas in older age, we talk more, we socialize more, we empathize more and engage emotively. And so there's more pathetic or emotional flexibility, and more mental flexibility is necessary rather than mental or emotional rigidity. In late adulthood, ego differentiation is more valued than work role preoccupation. So understanding who we are as individuals and valuing who we are as individuals rather than just being focused on who I am in my job. Who am I really? And we move past our bodies and move past our ego and ourselves into sort of again, here's that term, psychohistorical perspective. There are differences among different age groups with regards to how we view aging and death. The child who is very young doesn't understand the concept of death. They don't understand it as a permanent thing. And they don't gain this aspect until about age 5 to 7. Their first experience of death is oftentimes with pets, sometimes with grandparents, um, rarely with parents, but sometimes that occurs too. And with appropriate information, they can attend funerals. Um, and now, what does that appropriate information look like? For some, it differs. I mean, depending on what they saw of the individual's death, did they see the individual declining and dying? Um, do they can they gain an understanding of, okay, you know, your grandfather isn't going to be coming back. He's gone someplace else. You know, maybe that's about the extent to which they understand it. Adolescents tend to avoid the concept of death. They don't like to talk about it. They think that it happens to anybody but them, but they do have a cognitive understanding of death that is similar to adults. Young adults, though, they typically see it as being robbed. They see it as, death as being a robbery of one's life, especially if it occurs when somebody is young. Middle age, they typically are starting to understand, okay, I need to prepare for this. This is something that is going to happen, and I'm next. This is the sandwich generation, remember? So they're seeing their parents going through this stage. Ironically, though, the late adulthood individuals are the ones that are least concerned about dying. They have struggled through this oftentimes. They have come to an acceptance. They've come to a conclusion. They've said, okay, this is going to happen. I've made preparations, and, they may even be looking forward to the end, saying, you know what, I've lived my life. It's time for it to be done. People go through different stages of grief at the concept of death. And one of the big theorists on the construct of death and grief and coping with death is Kubler-Ross. And Kubler-Ross came up with 5 stages of death, of coping and grieving that include denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and lastly, acceptance. And here's the thing, though. Kubler-Ross's theory has garnered a lot of fire over the past couple of years because originally she described this theory in terms of a linear progression. One goes through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. But research has found that some people may not experience any of these stages, and that some people may actually experience more than one stage at once. I mean, we may, be very angry and depressed at the same time. It's not like, we're going to check off, the box of, okay, gone through denial. Next, anger. All right. Looking forward to bargaining. All right, So it's not like we go through this in a linear stage progression. So when you look at Kubler-Ross's stages of death, take it as a skeleton, a theory for understanding what people may go through when one dies or when one is coping with their own ultimate demise. So, what are some of the fears that people experience when moving towards death? A lot of times it's a fear of what happens afterwards. Is there going to be an ultimate judgment? Is there going to be a heaven or a hell? Is what I've done really going to, lead me to an ultimate judgment of my actions and who I was as an individual? But then there's a fear of the process of dying as well. Pain, loss of bodily functioning, indignity, and perhaps seeing oneself as being a burden and encumbering other members of their family and caregivers and whatnot like that. And then there's the fear of the loss of control, loss of status, perhaps, a loss of, again, dignity, or a sense of, I haven't finished. I'm not done yet. I have to keep going. I have to keep fighting so that I can make a difference. A lot of times I've spoken to a couple of individuals who worked in hospice. And one of the big things that they'll say to somebody is, it's okay to let go. It's okay. And they've told me a lot of times they'll see somebody just, and very soon after that they will let go. It's a fear of loss of control, a fear of being apart from others, for instance. It's okay to let go. So what are the clinical applications of this? Obviously, if you are hoping to work in gerontological field of counseling, you will see a lot of this, and this will be very salient to you. However, a lot of times, if we are working in, for instance, neuropsychological clinics or things like that, we're dealing with families with Alzheimer's disease, or with families who has a member experiencing Alzheimer's disease. Caregivers are how do we help somebody be the caregiver to somebody who's becoming demented, for instance? Or how do we help people adjust with the loss of the stabilizing force in their family? A lot of family therapists deal with that. In spiritual terms, this is a very spiritual stage for a lot of people. We see an increase in religiousness with older adults, and we see the need for counseling for grief and loss. And what does the Bible say about all of that? What does the Bible say about dying and what's coming afterwards? And what do I have to look forward to? In heaven, or do I have to have been a Christian before now, or can I repent and ask God to forgive me on my deathbed? Those sorts of questions arise. And multicultural questions also exist. So, again, if you have somebody from a Middle Eastern culture or an Asian culture come in, and they're grieving the loss of their family member, what does that look like for their culture versus your culture? How do different cultures look at or understand older individuals? Is there a respect there, or a lack of respect? Do they view them as sources of wisdom or burdens? And what are the ethical differences about how we respond to death? So, for instance, if you are counseling somebody and they die, what happens to their records? How do you as a counselor manage their personal information with regards to HIPAA, if they die? So those are very important things you need to think about. So that does it for this presentation. Again, this was the last presentation of the semester. I've enjoyed this greatly, and I hope that the time that we've spent together, or that you've spent watching these videos, has proven fruitful in helping you understand the complexities and the richness of life, and the richness that accompanies psychological growth and development. And I hope that that you will take these lessons into consideration as you move into your clinical practice, and that it would inform you and be to a benefit to your client. So until we meet again in another class, for instance, or we see each other at graduation or whatnot, I thank you for your time. I thank you for participating in this class, and I hope that you continue to have a good journey through through your individual growth and development. So, thank you very much, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the semester and good studies.